What happens when a 73-year-old man suddenly feels useless in his own home and decides to find out why? What he uncovers in his medicine cabinet turns everything upside down. I used to think exhaustion was something you earned. You garden all day, you chase grandkids around the yard, you help your neighbor fix his fence, and sure, by sunset, you deserve a little collapse onto the couch. That's fair. But let me tell you what's not fair. Waking up already tired. And not the didn't sleep enough tired. No, I'm talking the kind of tired that feels like your bones are arguing with gravity and losing. I'm talking about that strange, slow-burning fatigue that clings to you like wet clothes, even if you haven't done a damn thing yet. I'm Frank, by the way. 73. Used to be a mechanic. Back in the day, I could lift an engine block solo and still have the energy to fix my neighbor's lawnmower before dinner. But lately, walking from my guest house to the mailbox felt like a marathon with bricks in my shoes. Of course, nobody was concerned. Not really. You know what they said? That's just age, Dad. As if hitting 70 was some magical excuse for everything falling apart. As if fatigue was some polite guest that moved in with my wrinkles and thinning hair. And when I said something didn't feel right, they smiled like I was a kid with a wild imagination. Let me rewind. I live, survive, in the guest house behind what used to be my home. My daughter June and her husband Derek moved into the main house a few years ago when he lost his job. Just until we get back on our feet, they said. I believed them. Fool that I am. Now they're planted like century-old oaks. And me? I'm the old garden gnome out back, useful for nostalgia, but mostly in the way. Last month, I was up early. The sun hadn't even cleared the trees yet. I dragged myself out to the community garden by the library. My sanctuary. I'd been volunteering there for years. Planting, pruning, handing out cucumbers to kids who thought they grew underground. That morning, I bent down to pick a weed, and the world tilted. No warning, no pain. Just this slow, sinking exhaustion that wrapped around my spine and said, nope, not today. I sat in the dirt for a full 5 minutes, watching a beetle crawl over my shoe, wondering how something so small could keep moving when I barely could. By the time I made it back to the guest house, June was already on the porch, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. She glanced up, squinted like I was a stranger. You look awful, she said, like she was commenting on the weather. Thanks, I muttered, trying not to wobble. You should rest more. Maybe stop messing with that garden. You're not 20 anymore. I didn't even bother replying. She'd already turned around. Later that week, I found a note on my door. Typed. No signature. Please limit yard activity to after 10 a.m. Noise complaints have been made. Noise complaints. From my own family. Because I dared to rake some leaves before the birds finished breakfast. I took the note, folded it neatly, and burned it in my fire pit. Petty? Maybe, but satisfying. The real kicker came a few days later. Derek, my son-in-law, whose hands are softer than my pillow, decided to stage an intervention. His word, not mine. He sat me down at the kitchen table like I was a disobedient teenager. June stood behind him, arms crossed, expression straight from a courtroom drama. We're worried about you, Derek began. Oh, this should be good, I said. You seem confused, and you've been very tired. Maybe it's time we talked about assisted living. I laughed, out loud. I think that made them nervous. Assisted living? I repeated. You mean a nursing home? Well, no. Say it. A home. For the useless. For the forgotten. That's not fair, June tried. No. What's not fair is I gave you this house this land, and now I need a nap, and you're ready to pack me off like expired milk." Derek stood up, palms raised like he was the reasonable one. "No one's doing anything yet. We just want to be proactive. We don't want something to happen to you while we're at work." Something to happen to me. As if I was an old television ready to short-circuit. As if they'd come home one day and find me in the garden, face down in the marigolds, and say, "Well, we told him to rest." From that moment, I knew something had shifted. They weren't concerned. They were inconvenienced. Every time I showed signs of being tired, they saw it as weakness, as a burden, as proof that I didn't belong in my own space anymore. I stopped going to the garden, not because I wanted to, because I couldn't stomach another conversation about your health or being realistic. Instead, I stayed in the guest house, and that's when things got weird. My mail stopped arriving. I called the post office. They said the mailbox had been reassigned to the main house. June said it was a clerical error. I started getting my prescriptions late. The internet cut out for days. Derek claimed it was router issues. Even the handyman I used to hire for small fixes stopped responding. Turns out, someone told him I was moving. Moving. No one had told me. I began writing everything down. Not out of paranoia, but principle. The date. The insult. The way June called me sweetheart, only when she wanted me to agree to something. The way Derek talked about me like I was already gone. And all the while, that exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you forget what energy ever felt like, kept getting worse. I told my doctor. He said, "You're just getting older, Frank." And that's when I realized no one was going to help me. No one was going to take this seriously. Because to them, being tired was expected. Being ignored was normal. And being discarded was the unspoken plan. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. What happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how this story unfolds. It only gets sharper from here. You ever feel like your own life is happening around you, but not to you? That's where I was, 73 years old, sitting in a guest house I technically owned, but couldn't call mine. My mail redirected. My garden silenced. My name brought up only when I wasn't in the room. The days blurred, partly because of the fatigue, partly because I started losing track of who I was supposed to be to these people. June stopped calling me Dad unless we had guests. Derek avoided eye contact unless he needed something heavy lifted. In which case, suddenly, the old man was a legend. I could have taken it, maybe. I've taken worse. What I couldn't take was the pattern. See? That tiredness, the kind that crawled in before my coffee even brewed. It didn't just stay. It mutated. One morning, I woke up gasping, like I'd just sprinted in my sleep. The next day, I had a tremor in my left hand that made me spill an entire cup of tea. My hands, the same ones that rebuilt engines blindfolded, were now betraying me with every sip. I told June. She blinked twice, like buffering, then said, "Maybe it's time to cut back on caffeine." That was her solution. Caffeine. The irony? I only started drinking tea because she made a fuss about me drinking too much coffee. You know what they say. You can't win. But they never mention that sometimes you're not even allowed to play. That night, I couldn't sleep. So I did what any overexhausted, slightly infuriated senior does at 2 a.m. I went snooping. Not maliciously. More like spiritually. I needed answers. Or at least, I needed something to remind me I wasn't losing my mind. The Wi-Fi had magically returned the day after I accidentally told June I'd call a technician myself. Amazing how that router knew I was bluffing. So I opened my laptop and started searching. Unexplained fatigue in elderly, sudden tiredness after 70, reasons for chronic exhaustion no one talks about. And there it was. Not a rabbit hole, but a cave. Deep, dark, and full of echoes. Article after article talked about things that weren't just old age. Things like environmental toxins from household cleaners, nutrient depletion from long-term medications, subclinical infections that go undetected for years, and the big one, emotional burnout from being sidelined, ignored, and stripped of purpose. That last one? That hit me like a crowbar to the chest. Because here's the dirty secret. No one tells you about retirement. If no one needs you, no one sees you. And if no one sees you, well, it doesn't take long before you start forgetting you exist. I clicked deeper, opened PDFs, dug into health forums, medical journals, blogs from doctors who dared say what the glossy magazines wouldn't. And I started making a list, not just of symptoms, of suspects. Not every tired day is a mystery. But when it happens every day, and right after your daughter starts calling you sweetheart, in a tone reserved for dogs and delusional uncles, you start seeing patterns. I checked my medicine cabinet. Statins, antihistamines. Something Derek insisted I take for blood pressure support, even though my blood pressure had always been boringly normal. I looked up every single one. You know what they all had in common? Fatigue, weakness, memory fog, tremors, depression. I wasn't aging. I was being managed. I sat there, breathing like I'd just discovered a dead rat in the fridge. Everything I took for my own good might have been draining me into silence. And worst of all, I had trusted the people handing me the glass of water every morning. The next day, I confronted Derek. Calm, polite. My version of nuclear. "Hey," I said, holding up the pill organizer. "Which doctor prescribed the blue ones?" He didn't look up from his phone. "Oh, those are just supplements. June read an article about seniors lacking magnesium or something." "Right. And what about the yellow ones?" "Multivitamin." "No, the yellow ones. Bottom right corner." He squinted. "Oh, I think those came from the clinic she went to when Ryan had mono. The naturopath there gave some samples, said it'd help with circulation." Samples. I was taking free samples from a naturopath Derek had barely spoken to. And nobody thought that might deserve a second opinion? I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just nodded. And started planning. That weekend, while June and Derek were out of town for a wellness retreat, irony so thick you could pave roads with it, I visited an old friend, Dr. Harris, retired like me but still sharp as a tack. We used to fix up cars together. He still owed me for the time I rebuilt his transmission in July heat without air conditioning. He sat me down, looked over the list of meds and symptoms. After a long pause, he said, "Frank, you're not crazy. You're being sedated." That word, sedated. He explained it gently, but I heard the fury under his breath. Half those pills weren't necessary. At least, not without regular blood tests, which no one had bothered with. The fatigue could have come from interactions between them. The tremors, possible side effect of long-term use. The memory fog, probably from the antihistamines June said were just to help you sleep. He offered to run a full panel next week. I shook his hand like it was the last solid thing in my life. When I got home, I didn't go inside right away. I stood by my garden. The weeds had taken over, but the soil was still good, still waiting. That night, I didn't take a single pill. Not one. And for the first time in weeks, I woke up the next morning. Not full of energy, no. That would be too perfect. But aware. Clear. Angry, yes, but alive in a way I hadn't felt in months. I walked past June's porch that morning with a posture I hadn't used since my wedding day. She was sipping tea, phone in hand, ready to fire off another patronizing remark. But she paused. Because I didn't look tired. I looked dangerous. And that's when I knew they didn't want me tired because I was old. They wanted me tired because it made me easier to ignore. This is the turning point. Everything you've been waiting for, it's right here. Don't miss what happens when I stop playing the quiet old man. I always thought the slowest kind of betrayal came from strangers, politicians, lawyers, that one bank teller who smiled like she was doing me a favor while overdrafting my account. But it's not. The slowest, sharpest betrayal comes from the people who say they love you. Right before they tighten the screws, you know what's worse than being treated like a child? Being treated like a child who doesn't know they're being handled. For weeks, they spoon-fed me nonsense. In the form of vitamins, pity, passive aggression, and warm herbal teas laced with silence. But that morning, the morning after I stopped taking their pills, the morning my thoughts returned like old friends showing up uninvited, but welcome, something shifted. In me, not in them. They were the same. Still sipping, still scrolling, still managing my life like a failing side project. But me? I was done. It started small. Always does. I woke up, made my own breakfast, not the bland toast and soft-boiled egg routine June insisted was gentle on the gut. Number Y fried bacon. Real bacon. The kind you can hear crackling from across the yard. I brewed coffee. The forbidden dark roast. Let the smell drift out the window like a challenge. June stormed in around 8:12 a.m. Nostrils flared. Morning robe tied like a judge's robe. "Dad, what's that smell?" "Victory," I said, sipping. She blinked, confused by the defiance. "I thought we talked about your blood pressure." "We did. And I decided I'm going to die happy. If that means bacon, so be it." She huffed. "You're being reckless." I smiled. "You're being dramatic." That conversation might have ended there if I hadn't done the next thing. But I did. I went out back, grabbed a shovel, and started turning the garden. Yes, that garden. The one I hadn't touched in weeks. The one June claimed was too much for me. The one Derek said was attracting pests. Pests like me, apparently. It took me an hour to clear the first bed. I was sweating. My back protested. But my soul? It sang. People underestimate what it means to reclaim a ritual. To do something with your hands that says, "I'm still here." By noon, I'd uncovered the sweet basil I thought had died. It was clinging to the soil, like it knew I'd come back. Funny thing, hope? Sometimes it's a plant. Sometimes it's a shovel. Derek came home early. He saw me in the garden, boots muddy, shirt sticking to my back. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He walked up like I was a trespasser. "You really should be resting," he said, arms folded. "Did June not talk to you this morning?" "She did," I replied. "You'll be pleased to know I ignored everything she said." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "You're not acting like yourself." And there it was, that classic line. Whenever an older person dares to resist being boxed in, the younger crowd throws out the same card. You're not acting like yourself. Translation: you're not being obedient. You're not being passive. You're not shrinking quietly. Derek cleared his throat. "Look, this isn't working anymore. We're trying to help you, but you're making it difficult." "You're not helping me," I snapped. "You're managing me. You're packaging me into a polite, docile version that fits your narrative. And I'm done fitting." He looked startled. Maybe because I didn't raise my voice. Maybe because I'd never talked to him like a man who knew where the line was and how to burn it. That evening, the mask finally cracked. I found June in the kitchen, whispering to someone on speakerphone. "She's not safe in that garden," she said. "No, he's been agitated lately. I think it's a sign." "Yes, I know about the POA. He's not going to challenge it. He doesn't even know the full terms." POA, power of attorney. My ears rang. When I stepped in, she jumped like a child caught stealing candy. "You should knock," she said. "I live here," I replied. "At least, I thought I did." She scrambled. "Dad, listen. It's just, we're trying to make the best decisions for everyone. We care about you, really. You care about the version of me that doesn't ask questions." Silence. "You gave up your rights, remember?" she added, voice thin. "No, June. I handed over the house, not myself. You don't get to manage my life like a monthly budget." She looked away. For once, she didn't have a comeback. The next day, I met with Dr. Harris again. He brought paperwork, tests, evidence, everything I needed to challenge the so-called care plan they had quietly put in place without my full knowledge. I had options. I had grounds. More importantly, I had clarity. That night, I went to the garage, the one that hadn't been opened since Derek moved in. Found my old toolbox, my journals, a photograph of my wife, smiling in front of the first garden we planted together. That's when it hit me. I had stopped living for years. Not because I was tired, because I was made to believe I should be. They called it caring. What it really was, containment. I called a lawyer, the kind that doesn't ask, "How old are you?" before asking, "How can I help?" I didn't tell anyone, not yet, but I made copies of every document, every prescription, every note slipped under my door, every condescending, "It's for your own good." I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to scream. Number I was going to document. Because you know what people hate more than an angry old man? An organized one. We've passed the point of no return. The final chapter is coming, and it's not about revenge. It's about truth, and they won't see it coming. Funny thing about dignity. You don't realize how quietly it slips away, until one day you turn around, and it's standing outside the guest house window, staring in, asking why you let the door stay open so long. But it wasn't just dignity I wanted back. It was agency. The kind they whispered about in rehab centers and aging with grace blogs, all written, I might add, by people barely old enough to remember a landline. So I did what any exhausted, ignored, underestimated 73-year-old man would do. I prepared for war. A silent one. A strategic one. Paper cuts instead of punches. Legal filings instead of screaming matches. I made copies of everything. The power of attorney I supposedly didn't understand. The mail transfer authorization I never signed. The medication list from Dr. Harris, complete with side effects, circled in red like a crime scene. I printed text messages from June's phone, which she foolishly synced with the guest house iPad one afternoon and forgot about. Let's just say, she and Derek had more plans for me than I had for myself. They called it the soft phase out. Yes, that was the actual term. Apparently, I was phase 2. I didn't confront them. No dramatic monologue on the porch. No teary guilt trips. I simply asked June to join me in the living room one morning. "I've been thinking," I said, casually sipping my newly approved dark roast coffee. "It's time to have a conversation." She looked wary. Probably thought I was going to ask about funeral plots or assisted living brochures. Instead, I handed her an envelope. Thick, stapled, tabbed. She opened it. and immediately turned pale. "What is this?" "It's everything," I said. She flipped through the pages. Power of attorney revocation, statement from Dr. Harris, affidavits, printouts, screenshots, a notarized letter naming me sole trustee of my own trust, a little gem I established quietly the week prior. "You can't do this," she stammered. "You're not well." I raised an eyebrow. According to who? She was still holding the pages, but her hands were shaking now. The roles had flipped, and she knew it. "You've been lying," I said, voice even, spinning concern into control, dressing up manipulation in love's clothing, and I'm done. Derek came in just in time to catch the tail end. Looked from her to me like a man walking into a room where a bomb had already gone off. "What's going on?" he asked, arms folded. "I'm leaving," I said. It was true. I'd found a small rental, a 2-bedroom cabin not far from the library, tucked behind a grove of pines. Modest. Quiet. Mine. They laughed. Actually laughed. "You can't live alone," June said. "It's not safe." "Neither is staying here," I replied. I could see it hit her like a slap. Not from volume, from clarity. The next 2 days were a blur. I moved quietly. No fanfare, no announcements. Packed boxes while they were at work. Hired a mover who didn't ask questions. Left the guest house spotless. Because I may be old, but I'm not petty. On the 3rd morning, I was gone. Left a note on the kitchen counter. "I am not your burden. I am not your charity case. I am your father, and I am finally taking care of myself." That was it. And the exhaustion? It didn't vanish like a miracle, but it changed, because it was no longer laced with resentment, no longer dragged down by the weight of being politely erased. I still had days where my knees cracked like old floorboards. Still had nights where I'd forget what I came into the kitchen for. But the fog, the suffocating, soul-splitting fog of being managed, lifted. And in its place, I found something even stronger than energy. Clarity. I started walking every morning, tended a new garden, smaller, but proud. Volunteered again at the library. Even spoke at a senior group meeting about what I'd been through. You'd be amazed how many people nodded, how many understood. Because it turns out, I wasn't the only one whose exhaustion came not from age, but from being slowly dismantled by the people who claimed to love them most. A month later, I got a letter. From June. Handwritten. No return address. Just my name on the front. Inside. I didn't see it. I see it now. I'm sorry. I didn't write back. Not yet. Forgiveness isn't a sprint. It's a garden. You water it slowly. But I read that letter 3 times. Then placed it in my journal. Not to remember the pain, but to remember that even silence can bloom into something honest. So, if you're reading this, and you're over 70, and you're tired for reasons no one can explain, check your pills, check your papers, check your people. Because sometimes the weight on your chest isn't your heart. It's them.